just another illusion.
Hi there, my name's Johnny, and I'm going to wade into this determinism free will debate on the side of determinism. I'm a hard determinist, and I'm going to look at this not in a philosophical or logical sense per se, but I'm going to approach this from an empirically evidenced point of view. I'm going to look at some of the science, some of the evidence that backs up determinism and leads me to believe that determinism can be a well-defended position, not just from a philosophical point of view, which of course it is, but also from what we can garner from the sciences and from the world around us, and from research that's being conducted in this area. So I hope you enjoy. So the first sort of evidence I'm going to look at is based upon Benjamin Libet's research some years back, and he looked at a lot of non-conscious automatic reactions, or certainly reactions that we wouldn't have thought were automatic, but it turns out that they are automatic. So he wired up people to bits of machinery that basically would find out their brain activity when deciding to press a button at a certain time. And he worked out that if people decided to press a button at, say, time t equals 0, so at a particular point in time, the brain activity actually kicked in before they had decided to press that button. So before t equals 0, the brain was gearing up to do the action. So the conclusion was that with these sort of smaller actions, the decisions to make the action were actually made by the non-conscious brain, and the conscious brain is actually, you think it makes a decision, but it's just catching up with the non-conscious brain. It's sort of like epiphenomenalism, which is the conscious brain is the theory that the conscious brain, when it's deciding to do something, it's just a reflection of what the non-conscious brain has already decided to do outside of your consciousness. So Benjamin Libet, some of his methodology was questioned, but his experiments have basically been repeated in more modern times all over the world, and loads of people have found out exactly the same things. So there are loads of actions that we do which are in fact decided upon by our non-conscious brain, and we think we're deciding to press, for example, a button. I'm going to press a button now, but actually my brain had decided a very small time before that to actually press a button. So if we extrapolate this onto other situations, something like a game of table tennis or a sport, when you're running along or hitting a ball or kicking a ball, you're not actually deciding, right, I'm going to kick the ball now and I'm going to kick it in such a way that it curls left and so just misses that player and goes to that player. Your brain does it all for you. It computes that, calculates it, and does it. So, and it needs to, because sport is a very quick environment. So your brain, your non-conscious brain, is actually equating and calculating and deciding things for you far quicker than your conscious brain can. And these automatic reactions actually take up an awful lot of our decisions in our lives, in our daily lives. So whether it's making a cup of tea, you're reaching up to the cupboard, pulling out the tea bags, putting it in the cup. You're not actually deciding to do each of those individual things. You're basically going into automatic. So what we then have to look at is, right, lots of our decisions and actions that are taken throughout the day are basically automatic. So it's these larger actions and the more longer term planning that gives a gap for free will. The piece of science that I want to look at now is something to do with crayfish, and it is thought that the work that's been done with crayfish can eventually be extrapolated onto humans. Now, we've worked out by isolating the neurons in crayfish that they operate a cost-benefit analysis on each decision they make, so that each decision depends upon the environment around them, and evaluating, i.e. finding out the value for each different decision they could possibly make. And the conclusion here to the experiments that they've done are that we have now shown, quote, we have now shown that crayfish similar to organisms of higher complexity, integrate different sensory stimuli that are present in their environment, and they select a behavioural output according to the current values for each choice, which basically means they don't have free will, which you probably wouldn't think of a fish sort of having anyway, but they are calculating cost-benefit analysis for each decision, and then they go for whichever decision gives them the most value. And basically, this is what humans do. We do, on any decision you make, the longer it takes, the more difficult that cost-benefit analysis is, the 50% split between the cost of that decision and the value of that decision. So something that's like 99% value, you're going to make that decision every time. One that's 1% value and 99% cost, it's too big a risk. You're not really going to take it. So we are consistently evaluating in our mind, and our brains do this very quickly, the cost or the benefit to each decision, and then we simply make the decision based on that. And obviously, someone that's more inherently a risk taker is that is born out in their calculations. So these things are determined outside of this kind of frilly world of free will, where you think, oh yeah, I could do this, or I'm freely choosing one way or the other. Where actually that calculation is a determined calculation in your brain based on cost-benefit analysis. And we know this happens in other animals, and it's just convincing ourselves that it happens in humans as well. Obviously, we're highly more complex creatures, and the variables are much more. So any decision, it's effectively the same type of decision, just includes a lot more complicated variables. Looking at another piece of science, this time done by a chap called Walter Mischel, back some years ago, and he was a psychology professor at Columbia University, and he tested some 650 preschool children, 4-year-olds, by putting them in a room with a cookie or a marshmallow, something that they liked, and they could either eat the treat immediately or wait until he got back and have two. The reactions of the children were then measured and analysed. Some children could hardly last a minute, others 20 minutes, and the ones that held off from the temptation were seen as having good self-regulation, which you can look at as willpower. Those that were good at self-regulation were good at using distraction tactics, whilst others could resist because they could think about the object in a cold or very cognitive way. In other words, the marshmallows were not yummy and chewy. The vital research came next, and this is where Mischel returned to these children later in their lives, particularly at adolescence. The ability to delay gratification is associated with a number of favourable consequences for adolescents. Mischel and his colleagues examined the academic and social competencies of adolescents whose ability to delay gratification was first assessed when they were in preschool, in comparison to those adolescents who demonstrated a lack of delay of gratification when measured in preschool. Those who had an ability to delay gratification had higher SATs test scores, and were rated by their parents as being more mature, better able to cope with stress and frustration, more likely to respond to and use reason, more likely to think and plan ahead. And that's the work of Schroeder, Mischel and Peak from 1990. And basically the children able to delay gratification were able to cope much better at times of rejection as well. There are many real world applications to this, and basically their decisions and how they dealt with decision making situations was hugely determined, or it was hugely predicted by the way they acted as 4-year-olds with these cookies and marshmallow tests, and it played out for the rest of their lives in their application and achievement, so on and so forth. And it all comes down to the biology of willpower, and whether inside us, integrated into our person, determined by our characteristics, whether we have willpower or not. And those of us with willpower will good degree of willpower, ability to delay gratification, will be able to deal with certain situations in a very different way than those of us who don't have those characteristics, and these are determined characteristics. So interesting bit of research done there.
She's just another illusion. future.